Some names and details in this story have been changed to ensure anonymity and privacy. Not all images mentioned come directly from the actual scene. This is the story of how a seemingly perfect hiking trip turned into a nightmare that lasted for years in the American wilderness. In July 2018, 4 young people vanished without a trace in the backcountry of Yellowstone National Park. Ethan Cole, Maya Lynn, Daniel Brooks, and Claire Donovan left the safe trail to venture deeper into Lamar Valley and never returned. For 6 years, their families lived in torment, believing they had died, erased completely by nature from the map. Until one day, a buried device was discovered right in the area where they went missing. Inside were new photos of the 4 missing people. They were still alive, gaunt, held in an unidentified confined space, but in every photo, their faces had been deliberately scratched out. The area where their faces should have been was left with only brutal, ragged scratches, as if their identities had been erased from the images themselves. The summer morning in Lamar Valley began in the characteristic stillness of the wilderness, where wide bands of open grassland stretched under the sunlight and dense forests formed patches of hard-to-see darkness. This is one of the most remote and least monitored areas of Yellowstone National Park, where just a few hundred meters off the main trail, all traces can disappear completely. At around 8:10 a.m. on July 18, 2018, the check-in system at the Northeast Ranger Station recorded a group of 4 hikers entering the backcountry area of Lamar Valley, a vast, sparsely trafficked terrain with almost no continuous supervision. The group consisted of Ethan Cole, 32, a mechanical engineer with many years of mountaineering experience, Maya Lynn, 28, a landscape photographer, Daniel Brooks, 30, a medical student in good physical condition but inexperienced with multi-day trips, and Claire Donovan, 27, a freelance journalist who had joined many field expeditions. According to registration records, they planned to follow a main trail through Lamar Valley, camp at designated points, and return after 4 days, with plans to communicate when signal was available. During the first 2 days, all data matched the itinerary, including photos showing the group moving in stable weather and relatively open terrain with no unusual signs. However, on the morning of the 3rd day, Maya's device recorded a final photo in which the entire group stood at the edge of a thick forest. Behind them, terrain beginning to change with bands of rock and depressions not on the registered route. Subsequent positioning data showed they had left the main trail and entered an unmarked area where the terrain became more complex and communication was nearly impossible. At 9:02 a.m. that same day, Daniel sent a short message to relatives mentioning only that signal would soon be lost and the group would continue moving, with no signs of warning or request for help. This was the last recorded communication from any group member, after which all 4 devices simultaneously lost signal and never reconnected. In the first 24 hours, the loss of contact did not raise significant concern due to Yellowstone's terrain often causing prolonged signal interruptions. But as time passed the expected return date they had reported, the silence began to become unusual. Continuous unanswered calls, no response to messages, and no indication they had left the area or changed plans. By the 4th day, the prolonged silence turned concern into serious suspicion, especially when family confirmed that not communicating for such a long time was inconsistent with Ethan and Claire's habits, who always stayed in touch on previous trips. By the evening of the 5th day, after rechecking the entire schedule, positioning devices and expected contact points with no results, the families directly contacted local rangers to report the incident. Immediately after the missing persons case was opened, a large-scale search and rescue operation was launched in the Lamar Valley area of Yellowstone National Park, coordinated between rangers, professional search teams, and local support units. In the initial phase, the search area was determined based on the pre-registered route, including the main trail they planned to follow, and recorded overnight stops, from which ground teams were divided into smaller groups to systematically sweep each segment, while K9 units were deployed to track individual scents from items provided by families, and helicopters scanned from above for any anomalies across the vast terrain. In the following days, with no clear results, the search radius was expanded outward from the main trail to secondary trails and off-trail areas where a hiker might have veered accidentally or intentionally. Search teams faced complex Yellowstone terrain, including dense forest, rugged rock bands, damp depressions, and limited visibility zones, while erratic weather with scattered rain and strong winds directly affected ground trace preservation. Throughout the search, No distress signals were recorded. No electronic devices were found transmitting again, and no signs indicated the group had attempted contact or left markers, significantly reducing the likelihood they were still moving freely in the area. Search teams also investigated common hypotheses such as accidents from falls, slipping on steep terrain, or wildlife attacks, but found no corresponding evidence and no biological or physical signs typical of animal attacks. Meanwhile, vital positioning data from mobile devices showed the group did not move out of the initially identified area, with no evidence they had left Lamar Valley or approached nearby populated zones, causing the expanded search to always circle back to the original central area. After many days of high-intensity continuous sweeps combining ground and aerial efforts, the operation began facing resource limits and challenges in sustaining initial scale, especially with no specific leads to redirect search focus. Internal reviews were conducted to determine possible overlooked areas or errors in initial assumptions, but no clear mistakes were found in the search process. All reasonable areas had been checked at least once. The final result remained unchanged from the first day, with no clear indication of the cause of disappearance. After the official search campaign concluded, all forces withdrew from the Lamar Valley area of Yellowstone National Park, leaving an open case but no clear answers about the fate of the 4 missing people. Authorities were forced to rely on initial hypotheses to explain the incident. Most commonly, the possibility of an accident while moving through complex terrain, or the group getting lost off trail and unable to return, but both lack solid basis, as no corresponding physical traces were found throughout the prior search. No signs of collective falls on slopes, no evidence of temporary camps, and no signals indicating long-term survival attempts after losing contact, elements common in lost hiker cases. Meanwhile, the absence of biological or physical evidence also made wildlife intervention unlikely, especially in an area where animal-related traces typically leave clear signs. In that context, the case existed with many assumptions, but none strong enough to become an official conclusion, keeping the legal status of the 4 victims at missing without shifting to any other specific classification. For families and friends, the lack of a clear answer created a prolonged void where hope and doubt coexisted. They had no proof to believe their loved ones had died, but also no basis to believe they were alive, preventing emotional closure. In the initial months after the search ended, media continued to follow and report on the disappearance, but as no new information emerged, interest gradually faded. Article volume decreased, and the case was overtaken by other news. Over time, the file was moved to archive status in the investigation system, reviewed only upon request or new information, which did not occur for many years afterward. Authorities occasionally re-examined old data to ensure no important details were missed, but every check led to the same initial conclusion, reinforcing that the case had reached complete deadlock. It became one of the rare cases where all search and verification procedures were fully carried out, but still yielded no result. And over time it was gradually classified as an unsolved disappearance, existing in the system as an incomplete file with no clear path forward. A few weeks after the official search campaign ended, a ranger team returned to the central area of Lamar Valley in Yellowstone National Park for a supplementary sweep per post-search protocol, focusing on positions previously marked during the search, but not checked at high detail, due to time and environmental constraints. During this process, in an area not far from the main trail but obscured by low tree clusters and rough terrain, they discovered a backpack lying right at the edge of a depression, mostly intact, with no signs of tearing or destruction, containing basic personal items such as dried food, topographic maps, and some survival gear, all in unused condition with no signs of rummaging or removal of valuables. A few meters away, a water bottle was found lying on its side on the ground, unbroken, cap still closed, with only a small amount of water missing, suggesting it was not abandoned in a prolonged emergency. Continuing to expand the surrounding area, the ranger team found additional scattered clothing items, including a jacket and a glove, all without significant damage, no blood traces, no signs of clawing or animal impact. The notable point was not in individual items, but in how they were distributed in space, the objects not concentrated at a single point as typically seen in accidents, but spread in a specific direction, forming a relatively ordered though disjointed sequence, with uneven spacing, inconsistent with random dropping during movement. When examining the surrounding ground surface, the rangers recorded footprints of multiple people, including at least 4 sets of different sizes matching the group's members. However, these footprints did not continue continuously but ended abruptly at one point, with no signs of further movement in any direction nor return. Differing from typical lost hiker cases where footprints often scatter or show disoriented movement. Additionally, no evidence of a collective fall, no signs of camping, no indication the group tried to stay overnight in the area, and no proof of wildlife activity such as large prints, fur, or drag marks. Surrounding soil and vegetation samples showed no strong disturbance, ruling out a large-scale violent event on site, while valuable items like electronics, maps, and food remaining intact reduced the likelihood of robbery. When compiling all factors, the ranger team noted the scene did not match any previously recorded natural accident pattern in the area, nor did it fit the behavior of a lost group. As in such cases, individuals typically retain essential items rather than leave them usable. The presence of multiple footprints ending abruptly in the same area, combined with selectively abandoned and undamaged items, created a pattern difficult to explain by natural causes. On-site specialists documented, photographed, and marked each object's position, comparing with prior search data to determine if these items had been overlooked or newly appeared. Results showed the area had been swept before, but not recorded with the current level of clarity, possibly due to prior weather conditions or search team approach angles. However, though the specific reason for late discovery remained undetermined, the evidence itself carried clear value in shifting the view of the case from a possible accident or lost hiker scenario to one involving external intervention. On that basis, the scene report was updated with the assessment that the distribution of items, their intact condition, and footprint characteristics did not match natural victim behavior, and there was a possibility of external impact that prevented the group from continuing movement in a normal manner. Authorities continued to maintain the case file in open status. However, the priority level gradually decreased as no new data emerged for analysis or verification. Periodic reviews of previously collected information all led to the same result, with no errors detected in the initial search process and no overlooked details found that could alter the direction of the investigation. Meanwhile, the victims' families and friends refused to accept the case being forgotten. They organized spontaneous search groups, returning to the Yellowstone area on multiple occasions in hopes of discovering something the professional teams had missed, but these efforts yielded no concrete results, largely restricted by backcountry access regulations and the harsh terrain conditions. In parallel, external data verification channels were maintained for an extended period, including monitoring financial activity, checking bank transactions, credit card usage, and reviewing surveillance systems in nearby areas. However, no transactions were recorded after the time of disappearance, with no signs indicating any group member continued using their identity in financial or administrative systems. Authorities also examined telecommunications data, but none of the 4 mobile devices were recorded reconnecting to the network after the final signal loss, with no calls, messages, or positioning signals reappearing in the system. The complete absence of any activity related to these 4 individuals over a prolonged period made hypotheses of them voluntarily leaving the area or intentionally disappearing lack foundation, as such cases typically leave at least some trace involving identity or resource usage. In the local community and surrounding regions, no reports surfaced of sightings matching the victims' descriptions, with no information from hospitals, lodging facilities, or traffic checkpoints indicating they had moved out of the Yellowstone area. Over time, media attention dropped significantly. The initial flood of articles gradually disappeared from mainstream coverage, and the case was no longer frequently mentioned in news updates, which helped reduce public pressure on the investigation process. For authorities, the case was gradually categorized among unsolved missing persons files, existing in the system as an incomplete case with no clear path forward, reviewed only upon new information or family requests. During this period, no evidence emerged proving the 4 victims had died, yet no signs indicated they were still alive, creating a legal and psychological void where the case could neither be closed nor progressed. For the families, this meant enduring a prolonged state of waiting while authorities continued archiving the file as an unresolved disappearance, practically closed in terms of active investigation due to a complete lack of new leads over many consecutive years. Approximately 6 years after the disappearance was recorded, during a routine patrol in the backcountry area of Lamar Valley in Yellowstone National Park, a ranger discovered a small storage device lodged under a layer of soil and vegetation near a depression that had previously been swept during the initial search. The device showed signs of partial burial, with a scratched and dust-covered surface, but it remained intact in shape and was not completely destroyed by environmental conditions. After recovery following protocol, the device was sent to the Technical Division for examination and data extraction, a process revealing that the internal memory card was still readable, though some files were corrupted due to time and moisture. After successfully recovering the remaining data, specialists discovered a series of stored images, and right in the initial frames, the 4 individuals were identified as matching the records of Ethan Cole, Maya Lynn, Daniel Brooks, and Claire Donovan. Their appearance in this data immediately overturned all prior assessments of the case, as for 6 years no evidence whatsoever had suggested they remained alive after the disappearance. However, what drew attention was not only their presence but their condition in the photos, all 4 standing in the same space with relatively fixed distances between them, showing no clear interaction and with facial expressions impossible to determine due to a shared unusual feature. Their entire faces had been scratched out, not randomly but focused on key identifying areas such as eyes, nose, and mouth, making direct visual identification difficult, although other characteristics like height, build, and clothing still allowed reasonably certain identification. Closer analysis showed the face obliteration was not due to technical error or data damage, but resulted from intentional physical alteration to the image surface before the device was lost, or abandoned, raising questions about the purpose of concealing identity while other elements remained intact. Additionally, the environment in the photos displayed none of the characteristics of open space such as natural light, sky, or Yellowstone-specific vegetation, instead featuring a confined space with dim, unidentified lighting, no windows or clear reference points for geographic location. The backgrounds provided no surrounding environmental information beyond flat, dark surfaces that did not reflect light in the manner typical of outdoor settings. When cross-referencing the file's stored timestamps, specialists confirmed these images were taken after the date the group was reported missing, ruling out the possibility they were pre-trip photos retained on the device. This led to a critical conclusion that at least at the time the photos were taken, the 4 victims were still alive and existing in an unidentified environment, not the outdoor area where they were presumed to have vanished. The device's discovery in a previously searched area but not found during the initial phase also raised the possibility it had been concealed or undetectable under earlier conditions, only becoming exposed after a long period due to environmental changes. This entire body of data, though providing no specific location or direct information on the victim's current status, fundamentally transformed the nature of the case, from an unsolved disappearance to a situation indicating the victim's continued existence post-disappearance, while also demonstrating the presence of an unidentified factor that intervened in an organized and deliberate manner. After confirming the identities of the 4 victims, all data was transferred to the Image Analysis Division for detailed evaluation of every element that might reveal the circumstances of their appearance, with focus placed on body posture, relative distances between individuals, lighting conditions, and surrounding environmental features. Through frame-by-frame examination, specialists observed that the postures of all 4 shared a common rigidity and unnatural quality, lacking the flexibility or free movement typical of normal photo situations, with details such as arm positions, shoulder angles, and weight distribution indicating they were standing in a controlled or instructed state held for a certain duration, with no signs of position adjustment or natural reflexes in front of the lens. Meanwhile, the distances between the victims in each photo showed no significant variation, maintaining near absolute stability, which was inconsistent with the spontaneous behavior of a group standing together that usually exhibits slight fluctuations from body movement or interaction. Instead, this fixed spacing suggested their positions had been arranged or constrained within a specific space. Another notable factor was the complete absence of free interaction among the individuals, with no eye contact toward one another, no communicative gestures, and no expressions indicating reactions to others in the same frame, particularly unusual, given they were a group that had traveled together for days before vanishing. When analyzing lighting conditions in the photos, specialists determined the light source was not natural, lacking the characteristic diffusion of sunlight, no shadows consistent with outdoor environments, and no signs of reflected light from sky or vegetation. Instead, the light in the images exhibited focus quality, uneven intensity, and distinct bright-dark contrasts on the victims' bodies, consistent with an artificial source in an enclosed space. Furthermore, color in the photos lacked the natural variation typical of outdoor settings, with surrounding surfaces not reflecting environmental elements like soil, rock, trees, or sky, but rather dark, flat, featureless backgrounds offering no reference points for geographic identification. Combining these elements, the analysis division ruled out the possibility the photos were taken in an open environment or any natural Yellowstone area, as even under low light or poor weather, characteristic environmental signs would still exist but were entirely absent here. At the same time, the victims' rigid postures, lack of interaction, and stable distances in an unidentified space indicated they lacked freedom of movement or position adjustment, with a high likelihood they were in an environment where their behavior was directly or indirectly controlled. An additional point in the analysis was the uniformity in their appearance across multiple different frames, with no significant changes in position, expression, or lighting conditions, suggesting the photos may have been taken in the same space, under the same controlled conditions, and within a short time frame rather than at various locations. From a technical perspective, no signs indicated the images had been edited to alter context or create a simulated environment, with lighting and shadow characteristics consistent with a real but confined space. Based on this entire analysis, specialists concluded that the 4 victims did not appear in the photos as free individuals in a natural environment, but were in a confined space where their positions, postures, and ability to interact were controlled. Technical specialists proceeded to extract metadata from each image file, including original timestamps, device information, and parameters related to the data recording process, while also verifying data integrity to rule out any alteration or overwriting during years of storage. Initial results showed that the recorded timestamps did not match any time before or on the day of disappearance, but fell after the point when the group was reported to have completely lost contact, immediately creating a direct contradiction with the initial assumption that they may have died shortly after vanishing. To verify the accuracy of this data, the analysis team compared timestamps with other technical elements such as file recording order, data compression levels, and distinctive signs of the storage device to ensure the recorded times were not skewed by system errors or hardware damage. At the same time, they cross-referenced timestamps with the last positioning data from the victims' phones, confirming that the time gap between the final communication and the moment the photos were taken was long enough to rule out these being images captured during the original trip time frame. Another critical verification step involved assessing the possibility of data forgery, including whether timestamps could have been manually edited or altered through interfering software. However, no signs of manipulation were detected, with time values consistent with the device's internal structure and no logical discrepancies between files. Additionally, specialists checked synchronization between timestamps and environmental elements visible in the images, such as light levels and image quality, to determine if any anomalies existed between the time data and recording conditions, but results showed no significant contradictions, further reinforcing the timestamp's reliability. When compiling all these analyses, the investigation team concluded that the photos were not the result of restored old data or later edits, but were genuinely recorded at a time after the group was reported missing, which held major significance in determining the victim's status during the period following their disappearance from communication systems. Confirming they were alive at the time the photos were taken not only eliminated hypotheses of immediate death from accident or natural causes, but also indicated the existence of a period during which they were held in an unidentified environment, without the ability to communicate externally and without leaving any traces in standard monitoring systems. This simultaneously shifted the entire approach to the case, from searching for an accident scene to identifying a prolonged detention process in which the victims were kept alive under controlled conditions. The final conclusion from the time analysis showed no evidence supporting the idea that the images were created before or during the disappearance, no signs of data forgery, and all indicators consistent with the victims having been held after going missing, existing for a period without any recorded signs in ordinary systems, establishing a crucial basis for redirecting the investigation toward identifying the mechanism and location of detention. The case file was officially reopened with higher priority and involvement from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, marking a shift from a missing persons investigation to a criminal investigation involving signs of abduction and prolonged detention. All previous data from earlier phases, including search reports, scene documentation, information on discovered items, and communication records, was recollected and integrated into a centralized analysis system for review under an entirely new approach. Rather than continuing to consider hypotheses of accident or getting lost, The investigation team focused on identifying overlooked or under-evaluated signs of external intervention from the initial phase, particularly details related to personal items found in intact condition but unnaturally distributed, along with footprints that ended abruptly at one point without signs of continued movement. Analysis specialists reconstructed the entire timeline of the incident, from the start of the group's journey, the last communication, to the time the photos were taken, in order to pinpoint the precise window when intervention could have occurred, while evaluating data gaps that might conceal critical events. During this process, positioning data, topographic maps, and plausible travel routes within the Lamar Valley area of Yellowstone National Park were reanalyzed to identify locations where one or more individuals could have approached the victims undetected, as well as sites capable of concealing long-term activity without leaving clear traces. In parallel, behavioral analysts were brought in to evaluate features displayed in the images, including rigid body postures, controlled spacing, and absence of interaction, thereby building hypothetical models of detention conditions and the level of control the victims may have experienced, including possibilities of restricted movement, constant monitoring, and lack of autonomy in basic behaviors. Another key analysis direction involved assessing the potential existence of a detention site within or near the area, using criteria such as concealment capability, difficult access, and sufficient conditions to sustain multiple lives over an extended period without detection, leading to a re-examination of natural and man-made structures over a broader range than the initial search phase. At the same time, external data sources were recollected, including checks of reports on unusual activity in the area at the time of the incident, review of vehicles entering and exiting the area, and analysis of environmental data that might indicate human presence beyond the victim group. All this information was integrated and cross-referenced to build new hypotheses, with the focus no longer on determining cause of death but on the mechanism of abduction, methods of control, and means of sustaining the victim's existence over a prolonged period without detection by any monitoring systems. Results from this reinvestigation phase showed the case exhibited numerous characteristics consistent with organized behavior in which the victims may have been approached, controlled, and moved to a confined environment very shortly after leaving the main trail, before any unusual signs could be recorded. Redirecting the investigation in this manner not only changed the approach, but also opened a wider scope of analysis, in which terrain, behavioral, and structural factors were considered simultaneously to identify a plausible scenario explaining the complete disappearance of 4 people in an area that had been thoroughly searched yet yielded no direct traces for many years. The investigation team then moved into the spatial analysis phase to identify plausible areas where they may have been held, starting with detailed comparison of environmental elements appearing in the images against actual topographic data of the Lamar Valley area in Yellowstone National Park. Although the photos provided little direct information about the surrounding environment, specialists still analyzed indirect factors such as surface structure, light reflectivity, background colors, and minor details potentially related to construction materials or spatial conditions, then compared these with possible natural and man-made terrain types in the area. This process revealed that the environment in the photos did not match any form of open terrain in Yellowstone, lacking signs of soil, rock, vegetation, or natural light, and also did not align with public structures or officially managed zones in the park, leading to the exclusion of a range of areas previously considered in the initial search phase. Next, the team conducted detailed topographic map analysis to identify areas matching assumptions about a concealed confined space, including regions with complex terrain, limited visibility, and low access by visitors or rangers, areas with high forest density, rugged topography, or natural features such as caves, deep rock fissures, or inaccessible depressions were added to the review list, while sites near the main trail but capable of hiding activity were reanalyzed. During this process, data from prior search phases was integrated to eliminate thoroughly checked areas with no anomalies detected, thereby narrowing the scope to higher probability locations that had not been evaluated in detail due to time or access limitations. A key factor in zoning was the assumption that the victims had not left Yellowstone, as no evidence over many years showed them appearing outside the area, with no financial transactions, no movement data, and no information from monitoring systems indicating they exited the park, reinforcing the hypothesis that they were held within the original geographic range. Based on this assumption, the team focused on identifying positions that could allow one individual or a small group to build or maintain a confined space over a long period without detection, including areas outside normal observation range capable of concealing activity and not regularly inspected. Specialists also considered the possibility of unregistered or abandoned man-made structures combined with natural terrain to form an effective concealment system. The analysis continuously eliminated areas failing to meet sufficient criteria, such as high-traffic locations easily observable from afar, or incapable of providing necessary conditions for long-term life sustenance. Results from this phase narrowed the search scope to several smaller areas where terrain, concealment potential, and limited access converged, while aligning with the assumption that the victims were held in a confined space within Yellowstone without leaving clear traces in monitoring systems or related data. Based on the entire analyses of images, time data, and geographic zoning, the investigation team proceeded to construct a structural hypothesis about the environment in which the victims were held, with a central conclusion forming that it was impossible for this to be merely a random location or temporary natural shelter, as the recorded characteristics did not fit any spontaneous scenario. First, complete concealment was considered an essential condition, because throughout the large-scale initial search in Lamar Valley of Yellowstone National Park, no signs whatsoever indicated the existence of a confined space large enough to hold 4 people over an extended period, meaning the detention site had to be beyond direct observation, invisible from the air, and without easily recognizable ground traces. Such a structure could be placed subsurface, integrated into natural terrain, or camouflaged with surrounding environmental elements to avoid detection during sweeps. The second factor was long-term sustainability, as timestamp data showed the victims were not held briefly but potentially for many days, weeks, or longer, requiring the detention environment to maintain basic conditions such as air circulation, temperature control, and sufficient space for life sustenance, while ensuring these elements produce no detectable external anomalies. In that context, a natural space like a cave, while offering concealment, still failed to fully meet requirements for the observed uniform artificial lighting control and lack of natural geological features. The third factor was human control capability, as prior analyses indicated that postures, spacing, and behavior in the images were restricted, showing the detention environment was not merely a shelter, but a designed system to control behavior, limit movement, and prevent escape. To achieve this, the structure had to include controllable entry points, internally divided or restricted space, and the ability to maintain surveillance or impose rules on individuals inside. Another important point was the complete absence of any traces of the victims in monitoring, financial, or communication systems over many years, reinforcing the hypothesis that they were held in an environment fully isolated from the outside, with no access or interaction with those systems. When synthesizing the elements of concealment, long-term existence, and behavioral control, the investigation team concluded that the detention environment could not be a natural phenomenon or temporary structure, but had to be a deliberate system, built or modified by humans with the specific goal of concealing and maintaining control over the victims for an extended period. This system could include multiple protective layers, from difficult-to-access geographic positioning to internal structural elements designed to prevent detection and escape, while allowing operators to control the entire environmental conditions and behavior of individuals inside. This hypothesis not only explained the complete disappearance of 4 victims in a thoroughly searched area, but also aligned with image and time evidence showing they existed in an unnatural environment after going missing. From the hypothesis that a deliberate detention system was built for complete concealment, the investigation team continued to develop a detailed structural model of the space, focusing on how such a system could exist in the Lamar Valley area of Yellowstone National Park without being detected for many years. First addressing the entry point, which was determined to must be fully camouflaged and leave no obvious external signs. Possibilities included an entry located subsurface, covered by natural vegetation or integrated into the terrain as part of the surface, or placed inside an abandoned structure no longer regularly inspected, where the presence of an added feature would not draw attention. In both cases, the prerequisite was that the entry created no morphological or color difference from the surroundings, showed no signs of recent digging, and exhibited no evidence of frequent ingress and egress, explaining why previous searches, despite using both aerial and ground methods, detected no anomalies. After passing through the entry, The internal structure was assumed to consist of multiple layered spaces designed in depth, including separating doors and connecting corridors, forming a tiered system to control movement and limit direct external access. These doors could be designed to seal completely, preventing light or sound from escaping while blocking detection through ordinary observation methods. Corridors between areas could be narrow, elongated, and lacking clear reference points, making orientation difficult for anyone unfamiliar with the layout, while reducing the chance of free movement without control. This multi-layered design served not only concealment, but also created a passive defense system, with each spatial layer acting as an additional barrier, increasing the difficulty of reaching the central area where victims might be held. Another key structural element was the elimination of transport traces, as moving 4 people into a confined space undetected required minimizing or eliminating physical signs such as extended footprints, tire marks, or environmental disturbances. This could be achieved by selecting an entry location close to the victim's initial point of deviation, minimizing surface travel distance, or using transport methods that left no clear marks on natural terrain. Additionally, sustaining long-term system operation without detection required strict control of elements that could produce external anomalies, including noise limitation, light control, and ensuring no significant changes in the surrounding environment that might attract attention. Specialists also considered that the structure may have been built in phases, starting small and gradually expanded over time, allowing operators to adjust and refine the system without sudden detectable changes. When synthesizing all these elements, the resulting structural model depicted a complex design system featuring a fully camouflaged entry, spaces divided by doors and corridors, and an operational mechanism to prevent external tracing while minimizing detection throughout its existence. This structure not only met concealment requirements but also enabled complete internal environmental control, facilitating prolonged detention without leaving clear signs in previous search efforts. Building on the established structural model, the investigation team further developed a detailed hypothesis about how the system operated to maintain absolute physical control over the victims for an extended period, with focus on spatial elements, movement, and enforced dependency, still assuming the geographic context remained within Lamar Valley of Yellowstone National Park. First, the detention space was determined to be fully sealed, with no windows or openings allowing natural light penetration, aligning with image light analysis while critically stripping victims of day-night cycle orientation, preventing independent time determination. In this environment, lighting was provided entirely by artificial sources, adjustable at will, creating irregular or lawless light-dark cycles that disrupted circadian rhythms and weakened time perception. Next, internal movement was assumed to be under absolute control, with no open corridors or free pathways allowing unrestricted victim movement. Areas connected via narrow passages that could be sealed by physical mechanisms, such as locked doors or barriers, making every movement pass through specific control points. These doors not only separated spaces, but created successive protective layers where passing one did not mean reaching an exit, as each layer led to another similar structure, increasing complexity, reducing orientation. Alongside movement control, the system was assumed to restrict victim-to-victim contact, with individuals possibly held in separate areas or allowed interaction only under tightly controlled conditions, reducing communication, coordination, and planning while maintaining social isolation. Specialists also analyzed how basic survival needs were controlled in such an environment, with food and water provision not following natural demand but a controller-determined schedule, denying independent access to supplies and creating total dependency on the system. Similarly, sleep and rest were not governed by natural cycles, but dictated by light adjustment and spatial limits, possibly involving altered on-off lighting times or restricted rest areas, preventing establishment of stable routines. A pivotal element was the complete elimination of any physical escape possibility, not merely lacking an external door, but designing the entire system so all movement directions led to blocked areas or back to the starting point, forming a closed loop with no direct outward route. Corridors might be linear or branching, but always terminated at control points, rendering system exploration futile for victims. Furthermore, the absence of any external presence signs over many years indicated the system was designed to operate without producing detectable cues such as noise, light leakage, or surrounding environmental changes, achievable through soundproofing, light containment, and restriction of attention-drawing activities. When compiling all these elements, The physical control system model revealed an environment designed not just for detention, but for continuous comprehensive control over victims. With every life aspect restricted and regulated from movement, contact, eating, to resting, leaving no gap for free behavior. This design allowed operators to maintain control without constant intervention, as physical barriers automatically limited actions beyond permitted bounds. The investigation team continued developing hypotheses about psychological control mechanisms and the dehumanization process that may have occurred within the system, as observations in the images reflected not only physical restriction, but also marked cognitive and behavioral decline in the victims. The first identified factor was complete deprivation of time sense, a direct consequence of an environment lacking natural light where day-night cycles no longer served as reference. With artificial light adjusted irregularly, preventing victims from determining day start or end, and gradually eroding linear time conceptualization. Under such conditions, circadian rhythms broke down, sleep-wake cycles became unstable, leading to prolonged fatigue and reduced cognitive function. Alongside time disorientation came severe communication restriction, with victims denied normal interaction conditions, possibly fully separated or allowed contact only under strict control, preventing free information exchange and gradually weakening social bonds essential for psychological stability. Non-use of real names was also viewed as a psychological control mechanism, where personal identity was erased or replaced with symbols or alternate designations, causing victims to gradually lose connection to their former selves, no longer affirmed as independent entities but reduced to objects within the system. As identity blurred or denied, capacity to maintain self-memory and past recollection diminished, altering self-perception. Another critical factor was creation of total dependency on controllers, with all basic needs, food, rest, light access decided externally, leaving no self-controllable resources and fostering absolute reliance where existence tied to operator intervention. Prolonged dependency could lead victims to cease seeking or believing in self-escape, as all actions were restricted and needs routed through control mechanisms. This process contributed to breaking individual perception, replacing concepts of freedom, choice, and self-control with acceptance of imposed conditions not by will but by complete absence of alternatives. Signs of this dehumanization appeared indirectly in previously analyzed images, where victims showed rigid postures, lack of response, and no mutual interaction, reflecting not just physical control but psychological reaction decline. Disjointed, uncoordinated behavior without communication signs indicated they no longer functioned as independent conscious individuals but as objects placed in shared space without linkage. The scratched-out faces in images, though an external deliberate act, could also symbolize dehumanization, where identity was erased not only in reality but in recorded representation. Combining all elements, the psychological control model depicted a prolonged process in which victims were not merely physically confined but gradually stripped of identity components. Time sense, communication ability, personal identity, self-control, resulting in a state where individuals no longer reacted normally, maintained organized behavior, or showed initiative, instead displaying fragmented, disoriented, fully environment-dependent manifestations. From the hypothesis of a deliberately constructed and stably operated long-term detention system, the investigation team shifted to identifying individuals potentially involved, focusing on those with direct or indirect connections to Lamar Valley in Yellowstone National Park, established as the primary operational area. The first criterion was terrain familiarity, as undetected approach to the victim group in a vast area, followed by transport to a concealed space without clear traces, required detailed knowledge of routes, low traffic zones, and concealment-capable points. Subjects considered included those who had worked or lived in the area, especially with experience off main trails, navigation in complex environments, and familiarity with Yellowstone's natural conditions. The second criterion was capability to build and maintain a concealment structure, demanding not only basic construction knowledge but understanding of integrating structures into natural settings without anomalies, including material handling, light and sound control, and sustaining long-term multi-person confined conditions. Individuals with experience in construction, engineering, or wilderness survival were added to the analysis list, as they could perform such activities with minimal external support. The third criterion involved independent survival capability in natural environments. as operating a remote detention system required self-sufficiency or resource management without detectable supply chains, including traceless movement, food and water management, and enduring harsh conditions. Applying these criteria to existing data, the team began narrowing the list to individuals meeting all requirements simultaneously, prioritizing those with recorded presence in the area near the victim's disappearance timeframe. A key step was cross-referencing suspect timelines with the case timeline, determining their locations when the group left the main trail, presence in the area, and undetected access opportunity. Movement, work, and personal activity data were collected and analyzed for matches or anomalies, such as unverifiable positions during critical periods or sudden post-incident behavioral changes. Simultaneously, behavioral factors related to operating a detention system were examined, including long-term planning, secrecy maintenance, and prolonged environmental control traits uncommon enough to narrow suspects. As data compiled, several individuals emerged with high alignment to the criteria, particularly those combining terrain knowledge, construction ability, and survival skills with presence or ties to the area at the time of the incident. Linking these to the case timeline enabled the team to build a more specific hypothesis about how one individual or small group could have approached, controlled, and transported the victims into the detention system without clear traces while sustaining undetected long-term operation. The in-depth analysis process of the suspect's personal profile was implemented to determine the degree of compatibility between the subject's behavioral characteristics, lifestyle, and practical capabilities with the previously constructed detention model, in which one of the prominent recorded factors was a history of living detached from normal social environments, with signs indicating the suspect's tendency to choose an isolated life, limit communication, and maintain distance from the community over long periods. Collected data showed that this individual had resided or operated frequently within the Lamar Valley area of Yellowstone National Park, a region with complex terrain and limited strict oversight, which not only reflected a high level of familiarity with the environment, but also demonstrated the ability to adapt and survive independently without reliance on social systems or public infrastructure. Additionally, reports related to the suspect's personal behavior revealed a clear pattern of control in which the subject tended to impose rules, restrict the autonomy of those around them, and maintain dominance in relationships. Characteristics compatible with the hypothesis of a detention system in which victim behavior was controlled both physically and psychologically. Information from individuals who had interacted with the suspect described a person capable of sustaining control over extended periods, not dependent on constant presence, but through establishing fixed conditions and rules, aligning with the model of a self-sustaining operational system assumed in prior analyses. Furthermore, the ability to operate outside official systems was considered a key factor, as financial and telecommunications data showed the suspect had very low interaction with banking systems, no significant transaction history, and limited use of trackable communication devices, facilitating long-term activity without leaving easily identifiable traces. Specialists also determined that the suspect had practical experience in managing resources in natural environments, including efficient collection, preservation, and use of resources without official supply channels, a factor particularly crucial for operating a prolonged detention system without generating external anomalies. When cross-referencing these characteristics with a constructed detention model, the level of fit became evident, as an individual capable of isolated living, controlling others' behavior, and operating beyond standard surveillance could maintain a concealed environment undetected for years, especially when combined with deep terrain knowledge and basic construction skills. Moreover, analysis of the suspect's personal timeline revealed notable alignments with key case milestones, including presence in the area at the time of the victim's disappearance, and subsequent behavioral changes, such as reduced external contact or altered movement patterns, which could be interpreted as reactions to avoid attention post-incident. Behavioral analysis experts also noted that maintaining a long-term detention system required not only technical skills, but also high levels of persistence, control, and planning ability, traits reflected in the suspect's consistent and calculated past behaviors. When synthesizing all elements of lifestyle, behavior, technical capability, and temporal alignment, the suspect's profile showed high compatibility with the constructed model, not only in terms of capacity, but also operational conditions, thereby providing a solid logical basis to link this individual to the detention system hypothesis. Identifying this compatibility not only narrowed the investigation scope, but also offered a more specific approach for subsequent steps, where the focus would shift to direct verification of connections between the suspect and zoned areas, as well as identified structural features, moving from theoretical analysis to gathering concrete evidence for the investigative process. Based on all compiled investigative data from previous sections, including image analysis, timeline establishment, detention system modeling, and suspect profile, the Special Task Force proceeded with the most critical step of precisely zoning the suspected area within Lamar Valley of Yellowstone National Park, aiming to transition from hypothesis to on-site action. This process relied not only on standard maps but also high-resolution topographic data, vegetation cover analysis, geological variations, and data from prior searches to identify potentially overlooked areas, particularly those outside direct observation range or with obstructing terrain that prevented full prior search access. Specialists gradually eliminated high openness, easily observable, or high-traffic areas, focusing on positions matching the constructed models such as locations with thick soil layers capable of concealing subsurface structures or sites showing signs of disused old constructions where a system could be built or modified unnoticed. After preliminary zoning, the team conducted detailed micro-level terrain analysis, including identification of discrete access routes, vision-blocking points, and areas potentially supporting traceless transport, thereby forming an operational map with high-priority zones. In parallel with location identification, a comprehensive risk assessment protocol was implemented to prepare for possible rescue scenarios, with the first risk being victim relocation if the suspect detected intervention. Based on the identified multi-layered system model, such movement could occur entirely internally without external signs, requiring plans to simultaneously control multiple areas to limit relocation possibilities. The second risk involves suspect response, with a profile indicating environmental control and long-term planning capability, potentially including barricading, using structure for delay, or creating obstacles to impede approach, thus necessitating rapid and flexible handling options to minimize confrontation time. From these assessments, the rescue plan was built in a multi-layered and synchronized manner, with entry point identification as the pivotal element, selected not only based on suspected locations, but also discrete access feasibility, safety, and internal space control potential, including assumed primary entry and any secondary access points to enable simultaneous multi-directional approaches and reduce suspect full system control. Participating forces were organized into specialized units with clear functions: the assault team responsible for approaching and controlling internal spatial layers, the support team ensuring outer perimeter security and maintaining containment ring, the technical team handling physical barriers and ensuring access, and the medical team positioned ready to receive and treat victims immediately upon rescue while supporting emergencies. Task assignments were detailed to each group, ensuring every position had specific roles without overlap to optimize coordination efficiency and minimize risks during execution. In addition, equipment preparation was conducted with high thoroughness, including high-intensity lighting for fully light-deprived environments, breaching and entry tools to overcome multi-layered locked doors or blocked corridors, personal protective gear for confined space safety, and positioning and communication devices suited to complex environments. Factors such as ventilation, temperature, and obstacle durability were considered in equipment selection to ensure sustained effective operations under constraints. The plan also included establishing secure intergroup communication lines using shielded environment-capable devices, along with contingency protocols for communication disruptions to ensure continued coordinated action based on predefined scenarios. Another key element was clearly defining campaign objectives, not limited to area access and control, but ensuring safe victim rescue with a maximum minimization of personnel and asset losses, requiring balance between speed and caution in each approach step. Implementation phases were designed in clear sequence, starting with discrete target area approach, establishing outer containment ring to block all ingress/egress, then proceeding to entry points and controlled layer-by-layer internal space takeover per plan, with each phase having specific evaluation criteria for continuation or tactical adjustment. In addition, specialists developed contingency scenarios for undesired situations, including discovery of structures not matching predicted models, victim position changes, or unexpected suspect reactions, maintaining plan flexibility and high adaptability. Pre-deployment training and drills were conducted to ensure teams fully understood tasks, coordination procedures, and emergent situation handling, minimizing errors during execution. Once all elements were finalized, the rescue plan was established as a highly organized campaign combining data analysis, risk evaluation, and synchronized force deployment, with the ultimate goal of accessing the detention system, achieving complete space control, and extracting victims under the safest possible conditions while ensuring all actions were based on verified information and maximized risk minimization throughout execution. The campaign was deployed in the zoned area within Lamar Valley of Yellowstone National Park, where prior analyses indicated high likelihood of an underground structure matching the constructed detention model. Forces approached from multiple directions to minimize detection risk, utilizing rugged terrain and dense vegetation for visual cover while maintaining reasonable intergroup distances to avoid creating unusual concentration signs. Approach was conducted under strict noise and trace control, with every movement calculated to avoid disturbing the surrounding environment, especially in previously searched areas showing no anomalies. Upon nearing the target zone, teams halted for detailed observation, cross-referencing reality with analyzed topographic data, focusing on points with even minor discrepancies, such as soil texture changes, unnatural vegetation distribution, or subtly impacted but concealed surfaces. After inspection period, a position was identified with high probability as system entry, its surface blending almost completely with surroundings yet exhibiting features not fully consistent with natural formation, indicating sophisticated human intervention. This entry lacked obvious signs like doors or hatches, camouflaged with natural materials, requiring prior specific orientation for detection. Upon confirmation, forces established outer containment ring, positioned observation points, and ensured no unusual movement in the area while preparing for entry breach. Direct approach was executed cautiously, using specialized equipment to inspect structure pre-intervention to avoid collapse or unintended mechanism activation. Once inspection confirmed safe opening possibility, breaching and entry tools were deployed to create sufficient access width for force entry while maximally limiting noise. After entry opening, a completely dark space emerged with no natural light and no ventilation signs, confirming subsurface structure as fully sealed environment, per assumption. High-intensity lighting was employed for visibility, and forces advanced in train formation, maintaining spacing and positioning for rapid response in any situation. Immediately upon entry, environmental shift became evident, with still air, stable temperature, and absent natural circulation, indicating design for complete external isolation. Internal structure was quickly confirmed as multi-layered, with separating doors and connecting corridors, matching prior analysis model. Forces proceeded to open each layer controllably, approaching, inspecting, and breaching every door per protocol to ensure no hidden threats before advancing. Interlayer corridors were narrow, elongated, and reference lacking, making orientation difficult without prior preparation, so teams moved per predefined schematic, using markers and support devices for directional maintenance. At each area, forces paused for comprehensive inspection including structure observation, stability assessment, and search for any human presence signs to ensure no overlooked spaces. Throughout entry, safety remained paramount, with every movement confirmed and no independent actions permitted. Intergroup communication was maintained continuously for real-time updates and tactical adjustments as needed. As progression deepened, structure complexity increased with branching corridors and tighter compartmentalization, requiring formation and approach method adjustments to fit actual conditions. Every inspected area was marked and logged to prevent disorientation during movement and control. During this process, signs of long-term structure use became increasingly evident from surface stability to spatial arrangement, all indicating sustained rather than temporary construction. Forces continued advancing to deeper layers with tight intergroup coordination to ensure all approach directions controlled while preserving withdrawal capability if necessary. Opening successive doors and corridor inspections followed repetitive yet non-simple protocol, as each layer potentially held unexpected elements requiring high concentration and strict safety adherence. As deeper areas were reached, spaces became more confined, lighting fully device-dependent, and all sounds amplified in restricted environment, heightening tension yet aiding early anomaly detection. Teams continuously checked side areas off main corridors to ensure no space overlooked while maintaining unit linkage to prevent separation in complex structure. Entire penetration was executed with objective of controlling each system portion before deeper advance, ensuring forces retained initiative and avoided surprises from unidentified factors. As the operational units advanced deep into the multi-layered system and secured control over most corridors and compartmentalized areas within the underground structure at Lamar Valley and Yellowstone National Park, the room-by-room sweep continued with heightened caution, as this phase carried the highest likelihood of direct victim contact while also presenting the greatest risks. Teams moved in the established formation, maintaining spacing, controlling fields of view, and continuously sweeping side spaces along the main corridors to ensure no potential holding area was overlooked. Upon entering a deeper spatial layer behind multiple opened and secured doors, forces detected the first signs of living human presence, including unnatural object arrangements, evidence of prolonged habitation, and a marked shift in environmental condition compared to previous sections. These indicators not only confirmed long-term use of the space but reinforced the assessment that this could be the central detention hub. As they closed in, lighting equipment was adjusted for broader coverage, while kept stable to avoid shocking any individuals inside. And at that moment, forces confirmed the presence of the long-missing victims, still alive within this sealed space. This confirmation immediately triggered the direct rescue phase, with the medical team positioned first to assess each individual's condition before any movement. The victim's overall state was recorded as severely emaciated, with clear physical signs including gaunt, weakened bodies, low energy, evident prolonged malnutrition, and significantly impaired mobility, some individuals unable to stand or move without full assistance. Basic reflexes were also affected, showing delayed or uncoordinated responses to surroundings, indicating neurological decline from extended confinement. Beyond physical manifestations, victims' cognitive state displayed numerous abnormalities with atypical reactions to the rescuer's arrival, some unable to recognize or orient to the environment or respond clearly to external stimuli, reflecting impaired information processing and reality perception. When lighting from equipment entered the space, victims exhibited pronounced negative reactions, such as turning away, shielding eyes, or curling up, indicating no natural light exposure for an extended period and visual systems unadapted to normal intensity. Additionally, failure to recognize rescue forces was noted, with victims unable to distinguish rescuers from prior controlling environment, some showing confusion or avoidance, while others displayed near total lack of response, consistent with prior analyzed hypotheses of eroded personal cognition and psychological dependency. The medical team conducted rapid individual assessments, checking vital signs including breathing, pulse, and reflexes, while determining emaciation level and urgent needs such as hydration, body temperature stabilization, and respiratory support if required, with all measures performed cautiously to avoid shock or worsening conditions. During evaluation, victims were kept in stable positions and shielded from environmental impacts like intense light or sudden temperature shifts to facilitate initial recovery. While the medical team worked, other units continued comprehensive checks of surrounding areas to confirm no additional victims remained in the access space, while maintaining control over entries and corridors for absolute safety throughout rescue. Once victims' conditions reached basic stability, the extraction plan from the system was executed per predefined sequence, using support equipment such as stretchers and mobility aids to minimize bodily strain and ensure movement caused no further injury. Forces extracted each victim in health-prioritized order, navigating through previously secured spatial layers, while other teams sustained security and monitored for unexpected environmental changes. Throughout transit, the medical team continuously monitored victim status, adjusting supportive measures as needed to ensure they could withstand passage through narrow corridors and confined spaces. Movement through successive doors and corridors was executed carefully, with each step inspected and confirmed before proceeding to eliminate emerging risks during extraction. Upon victims emerging from the system into the external environment, initial stabilization continued under improved light, air, and medical support conditions, with light exposure gradually increased to prevent visual shock. Forces also verified the number of rescued victims against initial records of the 4 missing individuals, confirming all had been located alive, though varying in emaciation severity. This confirmation marked completion of the campaign's primary objective and laid groundwork for subsequent investigative and victim support steps. Immediately after all 4 victims were extracted from the detention system and transferred to a safe external area within Lamar Valley of Yellowstone National Park, Forces promptly confirmed a critical factor. The suspect was not present at the scene during entry and rescue, indicating the subject had departed earlier or was operating elsewhere in the same geographic vicinity. The absence of the suspect inside the structure did not reduce the threat level, but instead heightened campaign urgency, as the individual remained at large and could continue concealment or attempt escape from the area. The pursuit phase was immediately activated with objectives to lock down the area, determine movement direction, and deploy chase forces in the shortest time. The initial step involved on-site analysis of the just-secured scene for the most recent traces, including footprints, soil disturbances, vegetation contact points, and signs of the most recently used exit, thereby establishing the suspect's initial departure direction. Tracking specialists quickly identified continuous traces leading away from the structure area, characterized by purposeful movement and exploitation of natural features to minimize signs, consistent with the suspect's survival capability and terrain knowledge profile. Based on these traces, pursuit teams were deployed along multiple vectors, yet focused on the primary axis identified, while employing positioning and marking devices to prevent loss of trail during transit. In parallel with ground operations, unmanned aerial vehicles were launched to expand observation range, providing real-time overhead imagery to detect anomalous movements or disturbed areas, particularly in high canopy zones difficult for ground forces to observe directly. Drone data was continuously analyzed alongside tracking information to generate a dynamic movement map, prioritizing high-probability zones for inspection. As pursuit progressed, traces began to change, with the suspect shifting to more complex routes including loops through difficult-access terrain and use of natural elements like watercourses or rocky features to disrupt tracking, indicating awareness of pursuit and active attempts to break trail. To counter this, forces adjusted tactics by deploying encircling teams from multiple directions to constrain the suspect's movement space while sustaining pursuit pressure to force movement within controllable boundaries. During this process, a new area with anomalous signs was identified, featuring recent human presence indicators such as altered vegetation, habitation traces, and temporary structures possibly used as shelter. Forces approached this area cautiously, applying safety inspection protocols before entry, including containment ring establishment and use of observation devices to assess internal status. Upon inspection, forces confirmed this as a secondary hideout, potentially serving as a transit point or temporary refuge for the suspect, demonstrating pre-prepared multiple positions to sustain mobility and evade detection. Discovery of this site significantly narrowed the search perimeter by providing a concrete reference for movement direction and operational habits. From this position, traces continued to be followed, leading forces to a deeper forested area with high canopy density, where observation became more challenging and required tight inter-unit coordination. Forces deployed encircling formations using both ground teams and aerial support to ensure no uncontrolled escape routes, while maintaining continuous communication for coordination in the complex environment. As approach neared the suspected zone, units conducted systematic sectional checks to ensure all spaces were swept before deeper progression, while preparing for potential suspect reaction or escape attempts. During inspection, the suspect was located at a concealed position, showing no strong resistance but evident preparation for continued movement if undetected, indicating sustained readiness to depart the area. Forces executed arrest per established protocol, rapidly securing the subject and ensuring no unexpected reaction capability, while inspecting surrounding area to rule out additional involved persons or hazards. After suspect apprehension, the entire area underwent thorough re-sweep to confirm no other detained individuals or system-related persons remained, including re-examination of previously accessed zones and expansion to adjacent areas. Confirmation of no additional victims was a vital step to ensure full case scope control and elimination of latent risks. Data gathered during pursuit, including movement traces, hideout structures, and related elements, was documented and preserved for subsequent investigative phases. The entire pursuit was conducted with tight coordination among forces, combining traditional tracking methods with modern technology to ensure efficiency and speed while minimizing the suspect's escape probability. The investigation process moved into the phase of gathering statements and consolidating evidence to build the prosecution file, with the focus on cross-referencing the suspect's statements, the victim's statements, and the physical evidence collected from the detention system. During initial interrogations, the suspect displayed clear non-cooperation, denying most allegations related to detention and control while offering justifications to mitigate responsibility, including framing their actions as a form of protection or necessary isolation within a self-constructed context. However, these arguments were inconsistent with the collected physical evidence. When compared against the detention system structure, including layered doors, corridors, and sealed escape-proof spaces, specialists determined that designing and maintaining such an environment required deliberate preparation and could not be explained as random or protective actions. In parallel with the interrogation process, the investigative team collected and analyzed all on-site evidence, including the system structure, devices used to sustain the detention environment, items related to providing victims basic needs, and signs indicating prolonged operation. This evidence was documented, categorized, and cross-referenced with the previously established timeline to clearly establish connections between the suspect's activities and the victim's extended disappearance. A key part of this process involved extracting data from devices found within the system, including storage devices and operational support tools, to search for information on timing, frequency, and methods of system use. When analyzed, this data provided additional proof that the victims had been held for an extended period with no access to the external environment. Meanwhile, the victims' statements were collected under special conditions due to their still unstable physical and psychological states, resulting in initially fragmented, discontinuous, and difficult to connect information. The victims struggled to determine time, sequence of events, and sometimes cannot clearly distinguish between different phases of their confinement, consistent with prior analyses of time sense loss and cognitive decline. Nevertheless, despite the fragmentation, these statements still provided crucial details about the detention environment, control methods, and conditions endured, thereby reinforcing the previously constructed model. Investigative specialists synthesized these statements, cross-referenced them with physical evidence and time data to reconstruct the full case timeline from the moment the victims deviated from the initial trail, through the process of control and entry into the system, to the duration of confinement and living conditions throughout. Connecting these information fragments required detailed analysis and continuous refinement, as each small detail from statements could play a critical role in establishing event sequence. As the data was compiled, a comprehensive picture of the case began to emerge, with the suspect's actions tightly linked to collected evidence, forming a logical and verifiable chain of events. The prosecution file was built on the combination of physical evidence, technical data, and victim statements, ensuring each element supported and reinforced the others to create a highly consistent evidence system. During this process, legal specialists participated to ensure all evidence was collected and handled in compliance with regulations admissible in prosecution and not subject to procedural exclusion. Cross-comparison between the suspect's statements and evidence revealed clear inconsistencies, as details provided by the subject did not align with verified data, undermining the reliability of the statements and further strengthening the charges. At the same time, analysis of the suspect's behavior during interrogation provided additional insight into how the subject perceived and rationalized their actions, helping specialists construct a comprehensive profile covering not only conduct, but also motive and operational methods. Once all elements were finalized, the prosecution file was established as a comprehensive document, fully reflecting every aspect of the case, from physical evidence to statements. The case officially proceeded to trial in the competent court in the state of Wyoming, where the main events occurred within Yellowstone National Park. The trial involved the prosecution, defense, legal experts, witnesses, and victims, with the central focus on presenting and evaluating the entire evidence system gathered throughout the investigation. The prosecution built its argument on a logical sequence of events, starting from the victim's disappearance, continuing through on-site discoveries, the identified detention system, and evidence demonstrating a deliberately designed structure for long-term concealment and human control. Presented physical evidence included the system structure, devices and items used to maintain the detention environment, as well as data extracted from storage devices, all systematically displayed to prove the detention was not random but planned conduct. Additionally, the victim statements, though initially fragmented, were synthesized and cross-referenced to form a consistent description of confinement conditions, control methods, and experiences endured over many years, thereby further reinforcing the physical evidence. The defense, meanwhile, maintained a position of denial, attempting to introduce arguments to mitigate responsibility or create doubt about evidence completeness, including questioning timeline continuity, statement accuracy, and the possibility of unconsidered factors. However, when evidence was presented comprehensively, including the correspondence between system structure, time data, and victim statements, the jury had grounds to conclude that defense arguments were insufficient to undermine the evidence system. Evidence evaluation was conducted according to the legal standard of reasonable certainty, with each element examined not in isolation but in relation to others, forming a highly interconnected evidence network. Invited experts at trial provided analyses of the detention system's structure, long-term operational feasibility, and environmental impact on victims, helping the jury better understand the severity of the conduct. After all elements were presented and considered, the final verdict found the suspect guilty on charges related to abduction, prolonged unlawful detention, and control, with a guilty verdict reached by jury consensus. The sentence not only reflected the gravity of the conduct, but also sent a clear message about legal accountability for severe human rights violations. After sentencing, the case's aftermath continued to be recorded at various levels, most evidently the long-term impact on the victims, who, though rescued, still faced prolonged physical and psychological trauma. Their recovery required time, specialized support, and a stable environment, as what they endured was not merely physical depletion, but profound disruption in perception and self-identity. Additionally, the victims' families had to confront the case's consequences, from the extended disappearance period and uncertainty about loved ones' fate to reintegrating them in significantly altered states, all creating lasting emotional and psychological effects. From a broader perspective, the case also impacted the community and authorities, raising questions about early detection of similar incidents and improving monitoring, search, and response systems. The case's conclusion was not merely the suspect's conviction, but the closure of a years-long process in which truth gradually emerged to combined investigation, analysis, and action. From an unsolved disappearance, the matter evolved into a complete file, with full evidence, statements, and legal conclusion, marking a transition from uncertainty to certainty. The case's end did not erase what occurred, but it provided a clear stopping point for the search and investigation process while enabling victims and families to begin recovery in a clarified context with established accountability. If you want to follow more mysterious disappearance cases and haunting rescue stories like this, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes. Thank you for watching until the end, and we'll see you again in the next journey, exploring untold truths.